Have you ever felt it? That quiet, almost haunting whisper in the back of your mind. That sense that you're somehow different, not quite moving in rhythm with the world around you. It's not about thinking you're better than anyone. It's not always a curse either. It's more like a recognition, deep down, that the rules everyone else seems to follow, the goals they chase, the things they care about, they just don't hit you the same way. It's as if life is this big, carefully choreographed dance. Everyone's in sync, following the steps. And you're standing just outside the circle. You see the pattern, you understand the moves, but something inside you resists joining in. You can't, or maybe you won't go along. And that feeling, which so many dismiss as loneliness or just being odd, might actually be the first spark of something greater. The stirrings of an awakening, the kind of awakening Alan Watts often spoke about. Now, Watts never talked about chosen ones the way we usually hear it, like destiny, divine favor, or some superhero story. For him, the chosen were simply those who begin to see through the illusion, the big joke of life that most of humanity takes way too seriously. He challenged one of the deepest assumptions we've been taught in the West, the idea of the separate self, this notion that you're just an isolated little I, sealed inside your skin, cut off from the rest of existence. From the time we're kids, we're conditioned to believe this, that we're individuals, competing, striving, constantly measuring ourselves against others. We hustle for approval, for achievement, for proof that we matter. And it's exhausting, because underneath it all is this fragile identity that always feels like it has something to defend. But here's the turning point. What happens when that identity starts to crack? What happens when you notice that the I you've been protecting isn't quite as solid or as real as you thought? That's when the aloneness sets in, because suddenly the world you thought you knew doesn't look the same anymore. The status games, the obsession with reputation, the desperate urge to fit in, they start to look a little absurd. The goals you once thought were everything lose their shine because the I chasing them isn't the whole picture anymore. And here's the catch. Most people are still fully invested in that game. To them, it's deadly serious. Winning and losing are everything. So when you step outside the game, when you start to see the illusion, you naturally feel a gap open up between you and everyone else. How do you connect deeply with someone who believes the game is real when to you it now looks like a kind of elaborate play? But awakening isn't about superiority. If anything, it softens you. It brings compassion because you understand the struggle, the fear, the striving, the suffering that comes from believing you're just a separate little self fighting through life. The difference is, your vision starts to widen. Your sense of self stretches beyond the ego. You realize you're not just living in the universe, you are the universe, experiencing itself in this form, right here, right now. And while that's liberating, it can also be lonely. How do you explain to someone that you feel like the ocean when they're still convinced they're just a wave? How do you share the joy of simply being when the world around you is so caught up in the endless grind of becoming? That's the paradox Alan Watts pointed to. Awakening brings clarity, freedom, and connection to everything. But until more people begin to see through the illusion, it can feel like walking the path alone. The deeper you go on this path, the more the isolation grows, because you start to see that so much of what we call society, The structures, the norms, even the beliefs we hold sacred are really just rules in a giant human-made game. Alan Watts often described it as a kind of dance. Everyone has their part, their role, their lines to deliver. From the moment we're children, we're taught how to perform, how to behave, what to want, what to fear. We're told what success looks like: wealth, recognition, status, power. And so we chase those things as if they were prizes that would finally make us whole. But the one who wakes up, the so-called chosen one, starts to see how arbitrary it all is. These aren't eternal truths. They're agreements, collective make-believe, rules we've all decided to follow without ever questioning if the game itself is worth playing. It's like being an actor who suddenly realizes they're standing on a stage. You might still play the role, but you can't take it quite as seriously anymore. The emotional grip loosens, the illusion fades, and even though you still have a life, a job, a family, responsibilities, your relationship to it all begins to shift. The scramble for more, the fear of less, the constant need for approval, it just doesn't have the same hold on you. But here's the tricky part. From the outside, people might not understand. They might see you as detached, aloof, even rebellious. They wonder why you're not thrilled about the big promotion, or why you're not panicked by the latest crisis, or why you don't seem to care as much about appearances. What they don't see is that your priorities have changed. You're no longer fully invested in the performance. You're paying attention to something deeper. Watts pushed us towards something radical, spontaneity, to live life like a dance, like music unfolding in the moment, instead of a forced march towards some final goal. But most people are caught in the story of becoming, always trying to become richer, better, happier, always chasing a future where life will finally begin. That's the ego's engine, keeping us running after something that never arrives. The one who wakes up realizes fulfillment isn't out there in some imagined future. It's right here, in this very moment, in the simple things, the way the clouds drift, the warmth of the sun on your skin, the joy of just existing. But how do you explain that to someone whose every waking thought is consumed with planning, achieving, and striving? To them, your peace looks like passivity. Your contentment looks like a lack of ambition. But the truth is, you're just dancing to a rhythm they can't quite hear. You're moved by a melody they're too busy to notice. And so, naturally, your life starts to flow differently. It doesn't follow the rigid map laid out by society. It unfolds in its own spontaneous way, guided by an inner compass that others might not even know exists. The further you go down this path, the more that sense of isolation deepens, because you begin to see what most people never question, that so much of what we call society, the rules, the roles, even the beliefs we cling to, are really just inventions. Elaborate guidelines in a game we all agreed to play. Watts often described it as a dance. Everyone has a role, a script, a costume. From the time we're children, we're taught how to act, what to want, what to fear. We're told that success means money, reputation, power. And so we spend our lives chasing those things as if they were the ultimate prize. But when you start to wake up, you realize how arbitrary it all is. What most people call normal is really just a collective agreement, a consensus reality. something that could shift or vanish tomorrow. And once you see that, it becomes nearly impossible to keep playing the game with the same conviction. It's like being an actor who suddenly realizes they're standing on a stage. You might keep delivering your lines, but your heart won't be in it the same way. The illusion has lost its grip. In real life, that means you still go to work, you still care for your family, you still handle your responsibilities. But inside, the frantic rush for more begins to quiet down. The endless anxieties about not having enough start to fade. The constant hunger for approval loosens its hold. And while that shift feels liberating, to others it can look like detachment, like you've stopped caring. People may wonder why you're not thrilled about the promotion, why you don't panic over the next downturn, or why you don't worry so much about appearances. What they don't realize is that your priorities have changed. You're no longer bound to the external game. You're tuned to something deeper. Watts called us to live with spontaneity, to treat life like a dance, like music that unfolds moment by moment, instead of a forced march toward some distant goal. But most people are trapped in the story of becoming, always trying to become more successful, become happier, become something better than what they are now. They place life in the future, always just out of reach. The one who awakens discovers something different. Fulfillment isn't waiting in some far-off tomorrow. It's here, in the present moment, in the simple act of being. The way the clouds drift by, the warmth of sunlight on your skin, the taste of a breath. But how do you explain that to someone who lives entirely for what's next? To them, your peace looks like passivity. Your contentment looks like a lack of ambition. And so the gap widens. You're moving to a rhythm others can't hear. You're hearing melodies they're too busy to notice. While they follow rigid maps laid out by society, your life begins to unfold like an uncharted path, spontaneous, organic, guided by an inner compass they don't even know exists. There comes a moment when the split between you and the rest of the world begins to feel different. You start to see what Alan Watts meant when he spoke of non-duality, that the opposites we cling to so tightly, light and dark, self and other, good and evil, are not truly opposites at all. They're two sides of the same coin, part of the same pulse of reality. And when that clicks, even just for a moment, something in you breaks open. The old way of thinking, dividing, judging, labeling, starts to look like a game that everyone else is still playing. A game that keeps the world locked in constant conflict, while you begin to see beyond it. You no longer feel like a separate piece, but more like a wave on the ocean, inseparable from the whole. It's liberating, but also lonely, because how do you argue about right and wrong when you've begun to see those lines as temporary, as fragile? How do you get swept up in tribal fights and factions when deep down you feel the unity underneath it all? You can't quite throw yourself into it anymore. And so, while others clash and defend their sides with passion, you find yourself standing in a quieter space, almost invisible, almost misunderstood. People might think you're indecisive, uncommitted, even disloyal. But it's not that. It's just that once you've glimpsed the unity of things, the separations no longer grip you the same way. You can still feel the suffering, the injustice, the pain of the world, but your response shifts. Instead of falling into judgment, you lean into compassion. Instead of rigidity, you find yourself moving with more fluidity. It's a subtle change, but it changes everything. And yet, this is not something you can easily explain. It feels like holding a secret, one you didn't choose, one you can't unknow. It's not something you hoard. It's simply something others can't see until they're ready to take that same inner journey. That journey usually begins with a restlessness, a quiet, persistent feeling that something isn't right, that there must be more to life than the roles, the labels, the stories we've been given. It doesn't always start with books or philosophy. Sometimes it's just a gnawing hunger in the soul. And once it stirs, you can't ignore it. You start letting go of the old stories. You sit with the discomfort. You allow yourself to walk into uncertainty, into the unknown. And this is where the solitude deepens. No one can take those steps for you. No one can fully see what you see or feel what you feel as you peel back layer after layer of illusion. It becomes an odyssey, not out there, but in here. A journey guided by an inner compass pointing away from the crowded path and toward a horizon that only you can see. There comes a point on this path when your relationships begin to shift. Not because you stop caring, but because your way of seeing changes. The things that once pulled you in, gossip, talk about status, chasing material success, no longer hold the same spark. What once felt lively now feels draining. It's not about judging anyone. It's simply that you're moving to a different rhythm, a different frequency. And this can be one of the most tender parts of walking alone, realizing that even people you deeply love may not be able to follow you into this new space. But here's the paradox. You don't lose love. If anything, it grows. You begin to feel a compassion that's bigger, wider, not tied to who someone is to you or what role they play, but simply because they exist. The way you connect changes. Small talk starts to feel thin, and what you long for are conversations that touch the marrow of life, consciousness, presence, the mystery of existence. And when those conversations are rare, when your depth is met with polite nods or blank stares, a quiet ache of aloneness can settle in. On the surface, you're still present with others, but inwardly, you're tuned to another wavelength. You're seeing through a different lens. Now, Watts would remind us that aloneness only exists because we contrast it with togetherness. From a deeper view, you're never truly alone because you are the universe. Every breath, every tree, every star is already you. Yet as a human among humans, the sense of being an outlier is very real. That's why you may find yourself drawn to solitude, walking in nature, losing yourself in music, in art, in silence. These become sanctuaries, places where you don't need to explain yourself, where your soul can simply be. And over time, solitude stops feeling like exile. It becomes fertile ground, a place where your most authentic self can take root. This is where self-reliance begins. You stop looking outside for validation, for approval, for ready-made answers. The external authorities, the gurus, the institutions, the cultural scripts, they lose their grip, and you begin to trust the one guide that never leaves you, your own direct experience of life. That shift is monumental. Most of us build our sense of identity around things outside ourselves, our job, our partner, our beliefs, our possessions. But when you start shedding those anchors, you step into something vast and uncertain. At first, it can feel frightening because no one is handing you a script anymore. But in that very uncertainty, a new kind of peace opens up. You begin to hear the quieter voice inside, your intuition, your own inner compass. You realize wisdom isn't something given to you. It arises from within, moment to moment, as you learn to trust the unfolding of your own path. This is what awakening really is. Not copying someone else's blueprint, but discovering your own, fresh, alive, spontaneous. And so the aloneness becomes something sacred. It isn't about the absence of others, it's about the presence of yourself. It's the space where authenticity flourishes, the place where you discover who you really are, free from the echoes of what the world told you to be. There comes a moment when you realize that the endless chase for approval, the craving to be seen, validated, understood, was never freedom. It was a cage. Every ounce of energy spent on polishing an image, fitting in, worrying about what others think, all of it kept you bound. And when that need begins to dissolve, something extraordinary happens. A reservoir of energy opens up. Energy you can now pour into creating, expressing, and simply living with more fullness. Out of this comes a quiet strength, not the loud, boastful kind, but a calm assurance, a steadiness that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. This detachment from needing approval doesn't make you cold or distant. In fact, it makes you more available, more capable of love. When you no longer lean on others to prop up your worth, you can finally meet them as they are. No masks, no hidden bargains, no unspoken expectations. Some connections will naturally fall away, but the ones that remain, or the ones that appear, will be deeper, truer, less tangled in ego. The paradox of walking alone is that it opens the door to the most authentic kind of togetherness. This journey is really a kind of rebirth, a peeling away of skins you never truly needed. The old self, the one that was driven by fear, by ego, by society's scripts, gradually dissolves. What's revealed is something spacious, luminous, and utterly alive, something that was always here beneath the noise. And this rebirth is not just one dramatic moment, it's a continuous unfolding. Each breath, each choice, each step becomes an invitation to live more authentically, to meet life as it is, spontaneous, unpredictable, alive. The peace that comes isn't about escaping challenges, it's about finding a center so steady that nothing outside can shake it. It's the peace of knowing your true nature, not as a lonely fragment, but as a living expression of the whole. Then you see it clearly. You were never truly alone. The solitude was a crucible, a sacred training ground, preparing you to discover the truth within. What once felt like separation was simply the process of shedding what wasn't real. And as the illusions fall away, you no longer feel like an outsider. You feel woven into everything, connected, yet free. You become like a mirror, clear and still, reflecting the world without judgment. You dance with life, not because you have to, but because you are part of the rhythm itself. The whisper of difference that set you apart at the beginning transforms into something vast, the roar of universal consciousness. And within that roar is a silence, an unwavering peace. This is the freedom found by the one who understands why they had to walk alone.